One cannot truly learn history by simply memorizing thousands of dates. That's not history. Rather, history is when you see the larger context. And for that, I am extremely grateful to my history teachers because they did exactly that, and ultimately they also ensured that my interest in history continued to grow and that I later went on to study history. So my deep thanks are entirely owed to those ladies.
Today, 80 years after a seemingly unremarkable traffic accident, we stand at an intersection in Mannheim. Here, General George S. Patton was seriously injured. That marked the beginning of the end for one of World War II's most renowned, influential generals. In this film, we explain exactly what happened back then and why this place continues to deeply move people even to this day. It has been 80 years since General George S. Patton was involved in a car accident near Mannheim, yet time has not lessened its significance. Back then, at an unremarkable crossroads, the life of one of World War II's most renowned generals came to an end. Today, a reconstructed staff car rolls into this exact perspective. Not for operational use, but rather solely for respectful remembrance. Family members, representatives of the city of Mannheim, the U.S. Army, and guests from several countries have come here to remember this accident and to reflect on the enduring consequences of war.
Aspect of my grandfather, and especially the uniform and all the things that my grandfather cared about in terms of enhancing his look to instill strength in his soldiers.
80 years after the accident, we stand here not only for a well-known name, but for all who were wounded in this war or who lost their lives, and to honor their memory and the sacrifices they made. At this crossroads, our journey into General Patton's final days begins, and into a story that reaches well beyond this accident and its immediate aftermath and its wider consequences.
Mannheim, Germany, December 9th, 2025. Dear friends, thank you, everyone, for gathering here today in this unassuming intersection in Mannheim, Germany. It was right here on December 9th, 1945, when my grandfather, General George Smith Patton, Jr., suffered an accident that set the final chapter of his life into motion.
And to understand why this accident made headlines across the entire world, we must go back to George S. Patton himself, to his path through the war, and to the crucial final few weeks immediately preceding December 1945. In 1945, George Smith Patton is widely regarded as one of the most prominent American generals in Europe. He fought with tanks and fast mobile units, first in North Africa, then in Sicily, and subsequently in France and Germany throughout the wider campaign. His units are regarded as aggressive, noticeably mobile, and often quicker than the rest of the army. Patton favors rapid tempo, clear orders, and direct frontal attack. His soldiers address him respectfully, if not always affectionately, as old blood and guts. His reputation is that of a man who rides at the front and expects of others precisely the same things he consistently demands of himself. At the same time, he is controversial due to strict discipline, public outbursts, and political statements that many people believe go too far and provoke debate. In the summer of 1944, Patton assumes command of the newly formed Third Army. It is sent into action following the Allied landing in Normandy, and then proceeds in a rapid advance across France. Cities, rivers, bridges, time and again his forces manage to exploit gaps and bypass German units, pressing forward with determination. In December 1944, General Patton's Third U.S. Army plays a pivotal and decisive role in the Ardennes offensive. While German forces at Bastogne encircle American units, Patton pivots portions of his army north and relieves the trapped soldiers, swiftly securing their extraction and stabilizing the front. For many of his supporters, this remains his most impressive operation of the war. After the military victory, Patton's responsibilities change. He is appointed military governor of Bavaria, tasked with organizing the occupation and assisting with denazification. At the same time, he is frustrated. He wrestles with political decisions. He criticizes denazification and the Soviet Union publicly and faces official reprimands from his own leadership for doing so. In the autumn of 1945, he was appointed to a new command, the 15th Army, with its headquarters officially located in Bad Nauheim. There he is primarily to assist in evaluating the history of the war, to collect reports, and to draft comprehensive analyses. For a man like Patton, who views himself as a frontline commander, this is more a desk job than a battlefield in practice. By the end of 1945, Patton is tired and restless. The war is over, and he feels trapped in a role that no longer suits him, yearning for a fitting purpose. In Bad Nauheim, he openly contemplates whether he should leave the army. On the 9th of December 1945, Patton accepts an invitation to join a hunting outing. Together with his chief of staff, Hobart Gay, he departs in the official staff car. The destination is the area around Speyer. From Bad Nauheim to Mannheim, it's only a few hours by car. Destroyed towns pass by outside the car, temporarily repaired roads, fields of rubble, and constant military traffic. Patton is said to have looked out the window and spoken, with visible sorrow, of the waste this war has left behind, of lives, of cities, of futures. Around midday, they draw near to Mannheim. The small column is driving toward the city from the north. A military police jeep is driving in front of the Cadillac, carrying Patton and Hobart Gay. A truck of the U.S. Army Transportation Corps follows behind. At about 11:45, the car reaches today's B-38 and turns into the town. Shortly thereafter, the driver must stop at a level crossing. After the train has passed, Patton's driver, Private Horace L. Woodring, sets the heavy Cadillac in motion again and continues into town along Käfertaler Straße. At the same time, a 2.5-ton U.S. Army truck approaches from the opposite direction, occupied by young soldiers, and is about to turn into the U.S. depot on Käfertaler Straße. As the vehicles meet in front of the depot, the truck suddenly veers sharply left into the entrance. Patton's limousine collides with the side of the truck, and Patton's head is hurled against a clock set into the glass partition of the rear passenger compartment. On the surface, he sustains a gaping head wound. Far more serious, however, is the injury to the cervical spine, which later leads to an almost complete paralysis below the third cervical vertebra. Military police officer Peter K. Babalas of the 808 Military Police Company happens to pass the scene of the accident and promptly commences immediate on-site first aid measures. In his later report, he described the situation with the words, "My first concern was that someone might be hurt, and the only injured person I could see was Patton. He was seated approximately in the middle of the back seat. His head was slumped to the left, blood running noticeably from his head and forehead. Some people came out of the depot, and I instructed them to request an ambulance to transport Patton as soon as possible to the nearest clinic, which was about a mile away. Among the first paramedics to arrive at the scene is the young Armando de Crescenzo from Unit 290, Engineer Combat Battalion. He is currently accommodated in the hospital on Grenadier Street, located directly opposite the later Turley Barracks compound. His eyewitness account is published after the war in a local New Jersey newspaper. It states, "When we arrived, we saw Major General Gay standing beside the vehicle and someone who was apparently administering first aid inside the vehicle. Major Snyder squeezed into the vehicle and took over the emergency measures. After providing care and a brief assessment, Tucker, Snyder, Sachs, and I lifted the general out of the vehicle and placed him on a stretcher and prepared him for prompt evacuation to safety. I leaned over him and asked, 'How do you feel, sir?' He grinned and replied, 'I don't feel much.' Then he added, 'If someone doesn't hold up my neck, I'll die.' It is also reported by the family, according to their own account, that Patton, shortly after impact, turned to his chief and said, 'Rub my hands, Heb. I can't feel them.' All reports clearly indicate that he very quickly realizes how severe his injury is. These sentences convey the full extent of the accident. Patton is bleeding heavily from a head wound, but most importantly, his spinal cord at the level of the cervical vertebrae is severely damaged. Below the level of the injury, he can hardly feel his body anymore. The paramedics load him into the nearest ambulance and take him to the 130 for urgent care, to the 131st Station Hospital of the U.S. Army in nearby Heidelberg. There his final 11-day struggle begins, which he loses on December 21st, 1945. Patton is not interred in the United States, but rather at the American Military Cemetery in Luxembourg, buried among the men who served under his command. His grave lies at the head of the Rhine, and to this day is a place where veterans, family members, and visitors pause and reflect quietly. For many, this grave is a symbol of the terrible cost of war and human sacrifice. Not only for a famous general, but for the many thousands whose names appear on the crosses and stars of David that surround him. Officially, the incident in Mannheim remains a traffic accident. The accounts of those involved and the U.S. Army's investigations describe the same picture. A truck turns left marginally too early. One driver reacts slightly too late. Seconds decide. Nevertheless, in the years after the war, speculation repeatedly arose. Some indeed see a deliberate attack behind the fatal accident. Others suspect political opponents or intelligence agencies. To this day, there is no conclusive evidence for any of these theories. When one places the preserved witness statements and the documents produced at the time side by side, what primarily remains is the impression of a tragic human error. Not a grand conspiracy, but rather a brief lapse of attention in a period when military vehicles were ubiquitous across the area and its surroundings. More important than the question of whether the accident could have turned out differently is what we take away from this incident. How we discuss responsibility in war, how we address the exercise of power, and how we regard the human beings behind the uniforms. 80 years on, the crash is long past. However, traces remain in the records, in memories, and right here, at this intersection in Mannheim. On the day of the memorial ceremony, a circle is closed. A replica staff car now stands exactly at the very spot where General Patton was wounded. Representatives of the city, of the U.S. Army, and invited guests from several countries jointly commemorate this moment. And one person who should not be absent is his granddaughter, Helen Patton, who is indeed present today.
Respect to our active duty military, any veterans who may be. So I would like to ask our dignitary from Mannheim, the Bürgermeister, Frau Pritzel, to say a few words. Danke.
Yes. So, welcome to Mannheim. I've given you also the best greetings from our top mayor, Christian Specht. I'm the first mayor of Mannheim, and I say my very warm welcome to you, Ms. Patton, and to the established representatives of the Patton Foundation.
Thank you.
Wherever you are. And of course of the distinguished members of the armed forces, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you that you're here. This is a very special day today. 80 years ago at 11:45, so almost at this time, there was an accident here, and George Patton died a couple of days later after this accident. And it was just around the corner here. So I would like to thank you all for being here, for doing a wonderful job, also to Mr. Patton, General Patton, and for you holding this foundation, which is very important to think of this history and to think of peace in these times that we still need. So thank you for being here. Thank you for thinking of this. Thank you for being here in Mannheim, because also in these times Mannheim was part of your history, and you are part of our history as well. Yes. So I hope this stays for our long history, and we should hold together in these very special times at the moment. So thank you for being here.
Welcome. Thank you. I think actually I want to thank you for those words, and those candid and very true words, especially to point out that my grandfather, and it's part of, I think, what made him a great person, was that he was flawed. And but it is true that he said some regretful things that people are still dealing with. And therefore, before I ask Chaplain Archibald to speak, I'm going to ask Michael Shevak, Rabbi, to say a few words on behalf of my grandfather and this moment.
You know, I find it absolutely astonishing that General Patton lived his life commanding his spine to stay solid and straight, and no matter what surprises came along the way, he never failed to order himself to be upright, dependable, facing dead on, life on, every single challenge that came. It's such an irony of his humanity, as Ms. Patton said. Yes, he was flawed, and the very thing that he worked so hard to accomplish, which is to never cease to weaken, never become so flexible that he lost his power and his input, that he would have that severed, okay? That the command of his spine would be loosened from him at that very moment, that only death could do that. Wars couldn't do that. Nations couldn't do that. Death had to do that. It's an astonishing thing. It's just astonishing. And, you know, the thought occurred to me, I mean, it's such a rather unusual thing to be here with the car that was the instrument of his death, but it's so important, especially in light of what the mayor said, is that each of us need to be Patton's spine. His spine has to continue with us, and each one of us needs to have a resolve, an absolutely impenetrable resolve to strengthen and continue the mission that was started way back when. And this is a mission that is older than World War II. It is the mission of the light of God in human activity. Thank you.
Thank you. Father Archibald.
I invite you all to bow your heads as I lift a few short collects from my faith tradition. Lord Jesus, resurrection and life, as we gather today to remember the fateful crash of General George S. Patton, we humbly ask you to remember him also. This sheep of your own fold, this lamb of your own flock, this self-proclaimed sinner of your own redeeming, this master of the sword who more than once called your name in blessing. Though he may have thought it foolish of us to mourn his death, we thank you that fearless men such as he have lived. We also acknowledge today, eternal God, that in your perfect kingdom no sword is drawn but the sword of righteousness, and no strength is known but the strength of love. So we ask that you might mightily spread abroad your spirit, that all peoples may be gathered under the banner of peace. Kindle, we pray, in the hearts of all people the true love of peace, and guide with your pure and peaceable wisdom those who take counsel for the nations of the earth, that in tranquility your kingdom may go forward till the earth is filled with the knowledge of your love. Lead our enemies and us from prejudice to truth. Deliver them and us from hatred, cruelty, and revenge, and in your good time enable us all to stand reconciled before you. Lastly, we commend to your gracious care and keeping all the men and women of our armed forces at home and abroad. Defend them day by day with your heavenly grace. Strengthen them in their trials and temptations, and give them courage to face the perils which beset them. And grant them a sense of your abiding presence wherever they may be. And until the last bullet of the last battle of the last war is finally fired, may we be always ready to pray for the defeat of those whose banner is injustice and whose good is oppression, and most of all, for peace. Amen.
Amen.
It's quite exciting, isn't it?
I find it very exciting and interesting, and it is indeed definitely thrilling. And we have just met the first American soldiers. And the press, and we're very impressed to be greeted by such an American, I don't know, an officer.
Most striking was that we had been introduced 20 minutes earlier, and he comes up to us now already knowing our names, which genuinely surprised us. That's really impressive. My cousin, this is the colleague here with the hat. He said that in America, it's apparently common when someone introduces themselves to then remember the other person's name who just introduced himself. So this is the situation, indeed.
It really is quite undeniably impressive, genuinely so indeed.
Now, these 80 years later, your presence here proves that his legacy continues to resonate, to provoke reflection, and even remarkably, to bring people together. On that fateful morning, Patton was agitated, fixated on returning to his home in South Hamilton, Massachusetts, to begin writing his memoirs that would include those personal frustrations of how the war had been handled. His chief of staff, General Hobart Gay, suggested that going hunting might calm him down. And he thought, well, you know, my wife, she did speak of a new hat, and maybe I can kill a pheasant and bring her a beautiful feather. They decided to make a day of it. Oh, and they also thought that maybe they would go and have a look at some of the treasures that had been accumulated by Adolf Hitler, including, incidentally, the Spear of Destiny, which was said to be a part of the collection, perhaps. You know, that's the spear that was said to have killed Christ, or pierced Christ. From Patton's back seat, as he was gazing out the window and remarking, "This is an utterly destroyed Germany. Mourning, what a goddamn waste." Suddenly, a military truck that had been illegally borrowed by a couple of young GIs who wanted to go for a joyride swerved unexpectedly into the front corner of Patton's cabin. Patton was the only one injured in this collision. His spinal cord, as you mentioned, was completely severed. "Rub my hands, Hap, rub my hands," he begged his chief of staff, who was sitting next to him, who had been unharmed. "Rub my hands, because I can't feel my hands." Can't feel anything. True to his nature, Patton, at that moment even, absolved all the troops that were involved in this crash, including his driver, Private First Class Horace Woodring, who would sadly still have to endure a lifetime of unfounded blame, something my grandfather never, ever wanted for them. Whether this collision was a tragic accident or something more deliberate has been a subject of endless debate. I can't tell you how many speeches I've given where that's the burning question on everybody's mind. I might as well answer it before I say my own name, but I can't answer, because the truth will probably never be known. So many conspiracy theories. I'm happy to tell you all about them. But what stands as important, most important, is what we know, what we do know. That after the accident, Patton was transported to the U.S. Army Hospital in Heidelberg, where he fought with the same grit that he'd shown all of his life. His injuries proved too severe, and he passed away on the 21st of December, 1945, the shortest, darkest day of the year. A life of immense brightness closed on the year's dimmest day, as though the world itself was pausing in this shadow to mark his departure. As the fading Patton murmured to his beautiful and devoted wife Beatrice in his final breaths, "It's such a hell of a way to die." And yet, here we stand, decades later, gathered in light, in remembrance, and in unity, mobilized by his legacy. I'm reminded of the final blessing offered by his beloved aide-de-camp, Colonel Charles R. Codman. General Patton was killed in action. The fact that people of such varied backgrounds and cultures are compelled to meet at this exact point is a profound indication that Patton continues to forge liberation, reconciliation for every generation. It's a mission that all members of our Patton Alliance, and I consider you now all members of our Patton Alliance, do share. My grandfather once said, "Courage is fear holding on a moment longer." So his courage, both on the battlefield and the last days of his life, still inspire those who seek not only answers, but also meaning. So as we pause together, may we not only consider the mystery of how he died, but also to honor the clarity with which he lived. Even today, Patton is drawing us together in gratitude. I would like to thank, first and foremost, the municipality of Mannheim, our first Burgermeister, Frau Pritzel, our color guard, our members of our military, veterans, Rabbi Michael Shevek, Father Chaplain Kyle Archibald. I would like to thank Gemma McGowan of AUSA. I would like to thank Jean-Claude Ernst of the Luxembourg Press, our president from the Luxembourg Foundation, Jeffrey van Wassenhoven, Stefan Verholen, our project manager, who did a fantastic job to bring everybody together. You know, his grandfather fought in Utah Beach. I mean, on the wrong side. The two of us met on the Siegfried Line when a German task force was looking to find two American soldiers, a German official task force with an official American task force. And when we're together, we'll tell you about this story because it'll blow your mind. And in that moment, we realized that there's a lot more happening than meets the eye here in this memory work. Finally, this is the end. A special acknowledgement to all of you for just being here, participating in this humble ceremony. God bless.
Ein bisschen Platz.
Ja, klar.
It makes them more because the power squirting is up. No power steering. Whose tripod? Just take it in. He's heading up forward, just keep it straight. And Donald Prince, where's Donald?
Here at these crossroads, on December 9th, 1945, General George S. Patton Jr. was engaged in a fatal accident that would result in his death on December 21st, 1945. May we always remember and call upon the courage of this great leader whose army forged the liberation of Europe. And as my German husband said once, also Germany was liberated. You know, so.
Can you hold it?
Thank you. There you go.
I have two German children,
Oh, wow. May I ask what their names might be?
Ingmar and Ragnar. Wow. Do they live in Germany? No. One is based in Paris. He works as a shoe designer for Balenciaga. The other is based in the United States. He practices as an architect by profession. I also have family in Florida. Oh, that's very nice. There are probably some Floridians here with us today.
Okay. And you know that the doctor, the neurosurgeon that was with Grandma, he did make a full report. I've seen it. He determined it as just an accident. I think that's, in a way, the best way to look at it. Although, I find it noteworthy, oh boy, I'm saying this in public, that my grandfather's archenemy had the same nickname as if you translated this German street. So there's a certain irony there. It doesn't mean anybody caused anything to happen, but the energies are just alive. But I suppose all that's been reconciled on the other side as well, and we all continue to work for good. Amen. We have one flower here, but I think it's actually fitting. This came from Luxembourg. It's it's maybe perfect, you know, in one way. But this was prepared for the table at one of the Luxembourg ceremonies last week, and it's got a carve of my grandfather here. And I think we can just we'll lay this here, and we'll have this plaque here, just for the moment.
Would you be able to hold the plaque?
Yes, we can hold the plaque. There it is. You hold the plaque.
You hold it with me as well.
Yes.
Can you hold it up and let's put it closer to it? Yes. Okay. Come on. Thank you so much.
Yeah, one more. For that guy.
In the end, there remains a place that for many years was just an ordinary crossroads. Only through stories does it become once more what it truly is. A piece of world history on Mannheim's city map. The story of General Patton ends here. The question of what war does to people does not end here. It begins in places like this. Everywhere decisions are made concerning power and political responsibility too, and the lives of others. When we think of Patton today, we think of him not merely as a famous general, but rather as part of a generation whose decisions we continue to feel. And as a reminder that behind every uniform there is, first and foremost, a person indeed.
When you stand today at the site of the accident where we just were, what thoughts, images, or private memories and personal reflections come to mind that you won't find recorded in the history books?
Yes, unfortunately, the images I saw today and those I saw last time are a mix of pictures that were already in my mind. They have been there practically since I was born. Because we Pattons in our generation grew up under the shadow of that death. Yes, from the very beginning, always aware of it. My grandfather used to say, "Be yourself, even when you are not yourself, otherwise you are nobody." He insisted that, even in moments of doubt or disguise, one must remain true to one's core, for losing that truth is tantamount to losing oneself. My brother and I always laughed because I said we cannot be ourselves. We're always standing, as if constantly on display for others to judge and measure us. In his shadow, I myself had many nightmares about car crashes, many nightmares as a child, and they stayed with me for years, even into adulthood. And as our rabbi said today, it is strange that on this very day, when a man with a back of steel, so steadfast and unyielding in spirit, stood among us, that very back was broken, leaving those of us who knew him stunned, bewildered, and deeply sorrowful. Yes, to me that means, all right, we will now be his other back.
Your grandfather is regarded as an uncompromising fighter. Which side of him, from the stories you know, contradicts that image the most? Given the anecdotes and personal memories you have shared or heard, and explain why, if you can.
Which image of him, exactly? If you go to Luxembourg, to Etelbruck, there is a statue of my grandfather, an imposing memorial that reinforces the public view of him as a steadfast, uncompromising fighter and a reminder to future generations. But to me, that particular figure simply doesn't look like my grandfather at all. To my eyes, she actually resembles Burt Lancaster more closely. My grandmother liked that statue very much and even blessed it. I believe that was because she saw him exactly as he stood there after the war. Oh, look, there's a plane. It's because that was precisely the place where he had been standing at that specific moment shortly after the war had ended, if I recall correctly, as far as I can remember. Personally, what I genuinely love about my grandfather is his laugh, his sense of humor, and even his weaknesses. He is someone whom I find very pleasant and whose company I consistently appreciate. My grandfather struggled with many insecurities throughout his life. He was not always self-assured, yet he made a genuine, sustained effort over time to build confidence and to overcome those doubts, seeking advice from trusted people, reflecting on his experiences, and steadily adopting new habits that helped him become more secure in himself. Imagine that, as a child, he could hardly read or write. His parents did not want him to attend school, and consequently he was largely denied a formal education, which left his early years notably difficult, because he had dyslexia. At that time, however, there was neither a name for it, nor any therapies, nor were there support systems or educational accommodations available to assist him. Therefore, inwardly, he was often soft and vulnerable, quietly struggling within himself. That explains his hard outer shell and guardedness, understandably so. What I have always appreciated is that, during his journey between England and Bavaria, many moments made him more human. Talks with strangers, unexpected kindnesses, the strain of being far from home, small failures and reconciliations, revealing his vulnerability, fostering humility and deepening his empathy and understanding, shaping his character. He rose again and again, not stronger than a typical general, but stronger as a person and as a leader, a father figure, truly deeply and steadfastly devoted to his soldiers. There was a moment shortly before he was due to fight in the Ardennes when he did everything right. He came up with the brilliant idea to turn his army 90 degrees and march toward Bastogne. Everyone rallied behind him, placing their trust in his judgment and following his orders with disciplined resolve, convinced that his decision would change the course of the coming engagement. Their steady confidence helped galvanize the troops for the ordeal ahead. 3 armies were assembled together, but the weather refused to cooperate, hampering their plans and complicating coordinated movements and maneuvers. He ordered his chaplain to pray for fair weather, asking divine favor to clear the skies so that their operations could continue.
Which we also heard today, exactly.
At that moment, my grandfather realized that he was not the number one, and with a measured, almost rueful calm, he acknowledged that others had taken precedence and responsibility within the family. But part of a larger whole, I believe one must, at some point in life, make a clear choice between good and bad and stand by that decision, accepting the consequences that follow. The difference between him and, for example, Hitler, is that my grandfather never tried to play or replace God. He did not seek absolute authority, pursue systematic domination or destruction, nor attempt to impose his will universally. Another difference is that they wore a similar uniform, almost indistinguishable. My grandfather looked far better than Hitler. The broadcast could show tasteful side-by-side shots, highlighting his distinguished look. Which of the two would you consider to be more handsome, Hitler or Patton?
There is a great deal of speculation surrounding his death. How do you respond when people favor conjecture instead of focusing on what can actually be substantiated by the available evidence?
There are a lot of stories about why this small yet extremely severe accident occurred. That accident ultimately took his life, ending his existence in an instant and leaving many people in profound shock and disbelief and spawning lasting questions among those who knew him. I met Russian spies, consulted fortune tellers, and others who claimed to know what happened. I invited several to speak, listened to their often conflicting accounts with an open but cautious mind, and weighed each claim, yet none produced verifiable proof or a convincing explanation. I personally have concerns about the relationship he had with senior officers, but it wasn't Eisenhower. While I remain uneasy about the nature and extent of those ties and the potential implications they might have for judgment and accountability, I must emphasize that there is no indication Eisenhower was involved. And I sometimes have to laugh, because the street where the accident happened shares the name of his greatest enemy, which I find subtly ironic.
Laugh, rival.
To me, those aren't proof. How should one put it? Perhaps they're small indications, subtle hints suggesting possibilities rather than definitive evidence, and thus deserve consideration. Yes, clues. But in the end, one must say, he is no longer with us. No one from that era remains alive any longer among us today. Perhaps one day we will discover what truly happened. Perhaps not. But as I said today, be grateful that he brought us together and that we may carry on his mission, honoring the values he stood for, and preserving his vision as we continue this work into the future with respect and steadfast commitment. For the good as for the bad, he was an imperfect man. He struck a soldier when he was not himself. He later regretted it. People who knew him say it happened in a moment of deep distress, not reflecting his true character. He probably suffered from some form of PTSD himself, which likely influenced his behavior, and his judgment was likely impaired on several occasions. He was not always diplomatically correct, and at times acted inappropriately. He made mistakes and failed to express gratitude to the Russians. He also made anti-Semitic remarks in private, which, it should be noted, does not excuse them or lessen their seriousness. That was internal, but has become public. We as a family must live with it, accept it, come to terms with the repercussions, support one another privately, and strive to preserve our dignity and privacy. I would like to tell a short story about that. My brother once gave a speech that left a strong impression on those present and moved many. He is a very good speaker. However, he faltered when the subject of anti-Semitism came up. He no longer knew how to move past that moment and to regain his composure before the expectant audience. My grandfather said this and that. What am I supposed to say now? We are so upset with him, but it is not our fault. And in that group of spectators he saw there, an elderly woman bent over, walks up to him through the middle, slowly and with measured steps, and nods slightly. Accompanied by her son, she stepped to the front of the platform and in a soft, respectful voice addressed him, saying, she said, "Mr. Patton, I know that you feel guilty and that you are ashamed of your grandfather's remarks, and I want you to understand that those feelings are natural under the circumstances, though they need not define who you are or your intentions, and it is important to acknowledge them and address them constructively. However, I am here because of him. He saved millions of my brothers and sisters, so I feel compelled to honor his deeds, which preserved countless lives and gave hope to many families. And if he had been able to, he would have saved even more. His efforts could have prevented even further suffering and loss among countless families in dire need, and would have provided additional relief. Stop. Thank you."
Wow, many thanks.
Okay, that's all right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
In the end, there are no trophies on either side. What remain are names, old letters, old photographs, and a lingering silence. Wars are often decided by people who do not freeze, do not bleed, and do not even scream. But the cost is borne by those who lie in the mud, wait in basements, and fight for each and every precious breath in hospitals. And that is the bitter truth. In war, there are no winners. There are only survivors, and scars that endure for generations. That is precisely why it is so important today that nations reconcile, that former enemies become neighbors once again, that people laugh together, celebrate together, and come together to commemorate and to remember. This day here, at the site of General Patton's accident, has indeed shown that quite clearly. People from different countries stand side by side, not to divide, but to remember together in shared respect. And suddenly it becomes clear how similar we really are. And perhaps that is indeed our task. To accept the person beside you, to look at them, to greet them kindly and warmly with genuine sincerity, and to extend your hand in friendship. Peace does not begin with treaties. It starts in small, everyday acts by each of us.